Well, I teach history at Bronx Community College, which is a unit of the City University. There are 22 campuses, and largely, initially, the City University was established to be a working class school. But as the economic crisis began to develop and unfold, and as more blacks and Latins began to go to school, they instituted tuition because initially it was free. And it was also established at a time where the working class was demanding education for their children. Now the working class in New York is black and Latin largely, and they're being forced to pay because with the economic crisis in 1976, before then it was free, now it costs money. So the PSC, which is my union, the Professional Staff Congress, ostensibly is in opposition to, because the president, Barbara Bowen, is a leftist of some kind, is opposed to tuition for, poor and working class kids. But basically doesn't fight either for the union members or for against tuition. We're now, at one point it was 100% full time, and now we're 57% adjuncts.
So, the situation of adjuncts, I mean, in the United States now, a large number of faculty are part-time, temporary, like farm workers going from job to job. What is the situation of adjuncts in CUNY, and how do they survive in New York, and what kind of conditions do they have?
Well, they don't survive very well. I mean, many of the teachers, we used to be 100% full timers. Now we're like casual laborers, and that's the way we see ourselves.
And you have a PhD?
And I have a PhD.
What is it in?
In history. And so there was a point where the full timers saw themselves as being the aristocracy. At this point, the one thing that it did do was it made the adjuncts understand that they were just like regular working class people, and that that elitist attitude that the full timers have has really been pretty much diminished among the adjuncts, because we're treated just like all other casual workers who work in McDonald's and everywhere else. In fact, our pay is probably less than other people, because they manage to get food stamps and things like that, and adjuncts are barely surviving. Many of them work at a variety of different schools, and so not only do they have to run around from place to place in order to make a living, but the students don't get the chance to see them because they have to run around from place to place in order to cobble together any sort of income. And with rents being the way that they are, in New York, it's almost impossible to survive.
And you have a union, the PSC, AFT local. How many members does it have?
It has 25,000 members.
And you've been fighting for a contract for how long? What's going on with your contract and the great wealth that exists in New York?
Well, the last contract took 7 years, and we finally got a contract that gave us, a minimum amount of money, 2% a year for the 7 years. But basically, the problem with adjuncts is that adjuncts get a base pay of somewhere between $3,200 and $3,500 a semester. And so many adjuncts, at the most they're allowed to work 3 courses in one school and 1 course in another, and even then there's not enough money with all of that in order to make a living, so that people end up having to either pay rent or live in their cars. Some people live in homeless shelters. It's really phenomenally terrible. And then on top of that, you're bringing work home because it's a full-time job, even with a part-time salary. Because people are, if you're dedicated at all, which most of the adjuncts are, they're going to give papers, they're going to give homework, and so you have to do that, after you finish your day at the job.
And so the AFT is a strong union, has maybe hundreds of thousands of members in New York. What's going on with the fact that you took 7 years to get a contract and that you're basically starvation wages?
Well, people are pretty disgruntled now. The 7 years is finally over. We got a contract. Now we're in the middle of another contract negotiations. And the most that the president is willing to do, her name is Barbara Bowen, is go up to Albany and have us swear our 7K signs. And
7K?
we're fighting for 7K, to double what we're making now, because we're making 35, so we want 7K a course. But even that is not sufficient to survive. But that's never going to happen because there's we don't have the right to strike, and because we're under the Taylor law. And every year that it comes up at the delegate assembly, whether we want to support the Taylor law or not, the delegate assembly supports the Taylor law. Ostensibly because this way we have a contract. Once our contract is over, we're still under the old contract, which is their argument, but basically we are not allowed to strike, which is what Barbara Bowen is absolutely happy about, because then we can't actually fight, and therefore Cuomo, who's the boss, and de Blasio...
He's the governor of New York?
Yeah, Cuomo is the governor, and de Blasio is...
Isn't the AFT supporting Cuomo?
The AFT is, but the PSC is not. The PSC opposes Cuomo.
Why is the AFT supporting Cuomo?
You know, we don't get a chance to discuss who we're supporting, so there's no...
How was that decision made?
It's made, I'm assuming, among the delegates at the AFT convention. And since nobody knows when the AFT convention is, and nobody will go against Randy Weingarten, there's really very little chance to be able to affect the convention. Because if you want to survive, as Barbara Bowen does, you have to be in the pocket of Randy Weingarten. So she does whatever Randy Weingarten wants.
So she's basically a supporter of Randy Weingarten.
She is in the pocket of Randy Weingarten.
And what's Randy Weingarten's role in the AFT?
She's the president of the AFT. And whenever there's a strike, she sends out, please support the strikers, and you give money, right? And which I always do to whatever West Virginia strikers are out on strike. But I don't see the AFT giving money or asking other workers to go out on strike in support of the Oklahoma teachers or West Virginia teachers. There's never any of that.
And the strike of the teachers, thousands, tens of thousands of teachers, first of all, how did they do it? They didn't have support of the union leadership in many cases, and they self-organize. And what has been the effect on teachers in New York?
Well, it's been wonderful, actually, because there are now articles in my union paper, in the Clarion, talking about look how wonderful it was. Here you come from a red state where it's a right-to-work state, where people aren't allowed to strike, and yet the teachers did it anyway. They organized independent of their bureaucrats and figured out how to get all of the counties out and go out on strike and actually win. So people are now writing articles about how we might follow the lead of the West Virginia teachers.
And there are a lot of unionized workers in New York. Do they ever get together, all the AFT members in New York?
All of the workers in the PSC never get together. We have 22 chapters. Each chapter meets by itself. The delegate assembly has people meeting from each of the chapters. But the only way to speak, when I went there, the only way to speak is to let all the delegates speak first. And then if they allow me, then I can get up and speak. Otherwise, I'm not allowed to speak as a person who's a non-delegate. So we had one meeting at Cooper's Union, last year, where everybody got together and people were getting up and talking about striking. And that was the last meeting we had together.
Now, these people call themselves leftists. You say Barbara Bowen is a leftist of sorts. Why are they so afraid of striking?
Well, she's afraid because she's cushy with management. She's accustomed to being more involved with management than she is with the workers. And if the workers mobilize, if she mobilizes us, nobody is going to tolerate her because people can't stand her. And so the only way she can stay in power is to have her protective shield around her, which is the delegate assembly. She has a coterie of these people who love Barbara. You're never allowed to say anything against Barbara because it insults her. And so there's a cult, and, if people feel that way about her, then they're going to get rid of her. And so, in order to maintain her position, she makes sure that we don't get together and strike or even have regular union meetings.
Is this corporate unionism?
It's funny because she thinks that she's different than all the rest of those people, that she's some sort of leftist, that she's some sort of socialist. She always has demonstrations about Guatemala and, all kinds of things that are outside the country. But when it comes to doing anything to defend the workers, her own workers, she never mobilizes. Whenever there have been mobilizations, because the adjuncts have mobilized and organized demonstrations ourselves, not because she's done anything.
Do you think she knows what the conditions of the adjuncts are?
She writes about it. She says it's terrible and that we should get twice as much money in better conditions. She's not unaware, but in order to win even 7K for us means going out on strike. And she's not going to do that.
And how have they tried to prevent the chapters of the PSC from organizing a strike vote at the chapters?
Well, from what I understand, at one of the chapters, this is a Hunter College chapter in Manhattan, some people organized a meeting to talk about striking, and she sent her goon squad out and made sure that people didn't get a chance to actually raise the question and discuss it. And whenever I raise it at my chapter meeting, the last time at least, the vice president came, and every time I tried to say something, he cut me off. And so people are intimidated by him in particular, by the vice president.
Is this the bullying of the members?
Well, I would say so. I try not to allow it for myself, but other people, especially the people who are trying to get tenure, the junior faculty, can't really afford to go against the union, and because it takes 7 years to get tenure. And if they do that, if it takes that long, and they don't get tenure, then the union doesn't defend them, they will be out of work and they will never get a job again at another university.
So management must like this situation where everybody's pretty unstable, their job situation is unstable, and the members are afraid of standing up to the union bureaucracy, the local union leadership. So basically you have a membership that is intimidated and bullied, preventing them from fighting for their issues. Is that the case?
It's so terrible that they organized the last contract that we had. Supposedly, some of the workers, some of the adjuncts got a 3-year contract so that we would be guaranteed work for 3 years. Where now we're only guaranteed for a year, and they can just let you go without any explanation. But after people voted for the contract, the union continued to negotiate, basically saying that if somebody didn't get the 3-year after they came up for it, they could be fired. So not only do people not even know what's in the contract, but
You weren't provided a copy of the contract you voted on?
no, the only thing you get is like, sort of bullet points, but it wouldn't.
So the union, Barbara Bowen's union, did not provide you a copy of your own contract that you would have to live under those conditions and benefits?
Not only did we not get a contract, but we also didn't get the real contract, because the contract that people voted on was a contract that said if we get a 3-year contract, then for 3 years we're okay. But later on, she negotiated with management saying that if we came up for a 3-year contract and didn't get it, we would be fired. So even if we got the contract, it wouldn't have been the final one. So people were voting on something that they really sight unseen.
What kind of union is this?
It's the same kind of union that unfortunately most workers in America have. It's the PSC's version of being bureaucratic and undemocratic. And
So that must turn off a lot of people about the union.
I'm afraid, even though I support people joining the union with this Janus decision, people's arguments are, especially what do they do for the adjuncts? Why should we pay? And so I'm afraid that a lot of people aren't going to be joining the union. I had to convince some of my co-workers to join the union because I think they should stick with it anyway. But many adjuncts are saying, like, bye-bye, why should I do this? Because basically they've screwed us over the last, since she's been in office, which has been 15 years.
And the Janus decision, the union officials are complaining that it's threatening the labor movement and it's an attack on labor. What are members educated about Janus, and also how are they saying that it should be addressed?
Well, the way they want to address it is to just get people to sign cards and to send out notices. Day after day, I would get something in my email, sign the card, and the shop steward would stand there like a stalwart, stand in the building every Saturday for people who she hadn't seen during the week to get them to sign the card. So I raised at every single possibility, we need to strike. We need to, at the very least, to go over to the Central Labor Council, to the AFL, to demand united action by all, workers to fight against Janus. And no matter what, every time I raised it, they ignored me. And so they did the same thing. They went out and got people to sign cards.
Now, there are many unionized workers in New York, like San Francisco, like other industrial cities. There are a lot of unionized workers. It seems like the union officials are afraid of bringing all these workers together and fighting collectively. Is that the case?
I would say so. And even when we had a demonstration about Janus, they didn't really mobilize for it. So with 8 million people in New York, millions of unionized workers, because people work for transit, they work for social services. If 500 people showed up, that was a lot.
So this was the Janus protest in New York City with 8 million people,
Right.
maybe a millions workers, unionized workers, and they brought 500 people. What does that say about the leadership of the unions?
Well, they also brought Cuomo, who's my boss, Cuomo and de Blasio, to speak. And the most that Barbara Bowen said, "Get up, get down, we're a union town." That was
So they had a chant.
That was her chant. And she said nothing more than that, except for "Get up, get down, this is a union town." It was the private sector came out more than the public sector in support of our fight against Janus. It was disgustingly demobilizing. And basically, even before all the speakers got a chance to speak, because they had these Democratic Party politicians, people left. They didn't even stick around.
And the Democratic Party, there was just an election in New York City, and Cortez Ocasio won. New York has a lot of money. Are they talking about the billionaires, making them pay?
Well, they're all billionaires, the people who are in charge. So basically, there's no way that what the union is talking about is getting Cuomo, and this has been over all the years that I've been there, to get them to support this thing called MOE, which is to have a guaranteed amount of money that's going to be for education. And Cuomo is unwilling to even to support this bill. And the union is so ineffectual that they can't even get Cuomo to do anything like promise that he's going to spend a certain amount of money on the city university. And so Barbara Bowen is not going to, support him, but she's supporting de Blasio, who's sucking the poor dry in New York City.
How is he doing that?
He's building all of these apartment buildings that are essentially going to raise the costs of, especially in the Bronx now, which is one of the poorest counties in the United States. It's going to be pushing up the prices of all of the apartments, in New York, which means that people are going to have to leave.
And is this part of privatization and gentrification?
It's definitely part of gentrification because the buildings are not, city housing. These are private developers, and he's in the pocket of the private developers. And so he's building all of this housing that is unaffordable for people who live in the Bronx. And it's because people can't afford to live any longer in Manhattan and Brooklyn. So they're looking for places to live. So they're going to be pushing up the cost of housing in the Bronx. And all those people are going to be forced to move.
Well, de Blasio was presented as this great liberal fighter for the people.
And my union still supports him. I used to get all these robocalls, support de Blasio. And de Blasio gave us a contract because we negotiate with both Cuomo and de Blasio, of 3%, 2%. It was absolutely nothing. People in my union are having to go get food stamps in order to survive. There was a woman who ended up dying in her car because she was so tired. She had to run from one school to the other that she was asphyxiated in her car. So the conditions are terrible, and they have no intention. Why pay us more? We can't strike. The city university is going to
But these teachers in West Virginia and Arizona and Kentucky couldn't strike either.
But they see the difference between them and New York is that they come from a working class tradition of miners in Virginia, but also because they don't have a union bureaucracy that's as strong as in New York, they were able to mobilize among themselves. In New York, it's very difficult to get around the union bureaucrats. It's impossible to get them to support anything. If people are out on strike, I went to the Central Labor Council to get them to support other strikers, and they absolutely refuse to do so. They may give some money, throw some money at them. The Spectrum workers, who are cable workers, have been on strike.
That's IBW? That's a big union in New York, isn't it?
It's very large, Local 3. They've been out on
30,000 members?
at least 500 days they've been out on strike. People are on food stamps, and the scabs are just walking by and going into the people's homes, and nobody even knows that they're on strike.
It must be pretty demoralizing for the workers.
Well, I heard one of the workers speak on May Day, and she was like, she had to support a family, and she was just crying because there's no movement.
And this is the IBW, which is a very powerful union.
Right. And so the AFL is doing absolutely nothing to support them. They gave them some money, and then they just washed their hands of the whole thing. So New York is different than Virginia because New York has got these tentacles, these bureaucratic tentacles everywhere, making it very difficult and demoralizing for workers to try to make any changes.
Are you saying that this trade union bureaucracy is an albatross on top of the working class?
I would say around the necks of the working class. They're not just on top, they're hanging us. And so in order to get rid of them, we're going to need to have, transcend them. I'm not for breaking up the unions, but I'm for transcending these bureaucrats because, they're ones, they make $400,000, $500,000. Randy Weingarten makes $500,000.
Over 500,000.
Over 500.
Plus money from her private charter school that she runs, Green Dot in New York City. She's head of the union, the teachers union, and she runs a charter school in New York City.
So, she's not going to go anywhere. So the only way that, people are going to get rid of people like her is to really mobilize in the way that the West Virginia workers mobilized. But at this point, New Yorkers are not yet ready. New York working class isn't ready, but I'm hoping with the terrible Janus decision, people will be, the unions will be forced to go out more to mobilize people, forcing them to talk about politics. And so, although I have to say, one of the bureaucrats in my union, when I said to her, people aren't going to join the union because they don't think the union does anything for them, her response to me was, I've never heard of that. I said, well, you haven't spoken to the workers, have you? Because that's what they tell me. So she goes in very, very surprised. No, I don't know that. That's not the reason. I said, well, maybe you need to start talking to some of the workers, And see, the thing in New York is that in the 1970s, the bureaucrats made a deal with the previous Cuomo that, if they give us the ability to have agency shop and we can then not organize workers but put them in agency shop, this way will not create any sort of problems for Cuomo, who is the dad of this Cuomo. And so that's what they have become accustomed to doing. We have agency shop. We don't really have to mobilize the workers because we're going to get their money anyway. And so,
is that a dues collection agency?
And I got up at the Murphy School, which is a school which is part of the city university, to organize, to create new bureaucrats, right, in New York. And I got up and I said, you know, about this agency shop deal. I said, you never wanted the workers. All you wanted was the money. And so one of them responded and said, well, we're going to start talking to the workers now to see what they want.
After the fact.
And also after I said what I said, which is you never cared about organizing the workers in the first place. You just wanted the money. So you were perfectly happy to agency shop because the workers create a problem when they come to union meetings and they talk up and they say what they want. This way you have a problem because you're not going to get the money. So everybody said, yes, we're going to go ahead and find out what workers want. We've been remiss, blah, blah, blah.
But I mean, you have elections, or you're supposed to have elections in your local, and apparently you don't even know when your elections are, and you have, just kept a secret?
I have to say, the only time I know when there are elections is when I get the ballot in my mailbox, because I had no idea that there were elections going on in the last election, the election before.
So they don't let people know, the members know, that there is going to be elections?
I was told that I should read our newspaper to find out when the elections are, because I had proposed that they announce at least in the meeting before, the month before, that there's going to be elections and find out who wants to run. And they said, well, no, read the Clarion. So that was their...
So they don't announce the elections and publicize them?
No, they don't.
Is there a reason for that?
Because it's in the Clarion. So therefore, they don't really actually have to do it. You have to be in the inn in order to know really what's going on. And I've unfortunately been remiss not to find out when these things are happening. So I'm going to make it a point to find out when the elections are and demand that. I might even go back in the next meeting and make a resolution that they need to send out letters to people saying that the elections are coming up, who wants to run, because they don't even do that.
That sounds radical.
Everything is for them. In fact, everything I say, they shoot me down, or they just try to cut me off when I'm speaking. So, in fact, I raised a resolution about racism, and that, that they should bring down. We should have demonstrations the next time some black person gets shot in the city, and passed my chapter, and the delegate was supposed to bring it down to the delegate assembly. So I asked my steward what happened, because she's a delegate, and she said, oh, they forgot to raise it. So it didn't even get raised. She was sorry. I was mad.
Union democracy at work.
It's, you have to be there, and being there is really challenging because you're not allowed to speak when you're there, because unless the delegates say it's okay for you to speak, then as a regular member you're not allowed to speak. And so you have to sit silently, or you can give out flyers outside, but it's very challenging to be there because basically most of the people who are delegates are full-timers, which means that they're the aristocracy. They're people who get paid a lot of money, they've been there for a long time, and they have no solidarity with the adjuncts. They insult the adjuncts.
How do they insult the adjuncts?
Well, if we were good teachers, we would have full-time jobs, right? This way, this is all we can do, is get a part-time job. And so we obviously either don't want or are not qualified enough to have it. We're not capable of being full-time teachers. And they have that real snobbery against part-timers. It's not universal, but it is basically sort of the attitude. And, when I mentioned this thing about the 3-year contract, Barbara Bowen said, well, when you're a full-timer, you have to wait for 7 years to get tenure, and then if you don't get tenure, you get fired. And I said to her, but after 7 years, if you do get tenure, then you don't have to be bothered anymore. Then you have a job for life. I said, for us, if we get the 3-year contract, we don't get tenure after that. We have to go back and start all over again. So that to make these things equivalent is really pretty outrageous.
So isn't that a 2-tier system?
It is 2-tier, and more, it's foolish. For the full-timers have their jobs, but the junior faculty, they're not going to keep their jobs, because if they can pay me $3,200 a course, and they have to pay these people $70,000, $80,000 a year, why will they keep them? Their jobs are on the line.
So the 2-tier is actually threatening the full-timer.
It's the people who don't have tenure. So that's why those people who have tenure, they don't come down to demonstrations. They, because of fear, writing their whatchamacallit, their thesis, or they're writing their articles, because if they don't do any of that, then they don't get tenure. So even friends of mine who are leftists don't come to demonstrations because they're in the middle of writing an article because they're afraid of losing their jobs, which is really foolish, because the only way they're going to keep their job, I'm going to get their job. I'm going to keep their job. They're going to be gone because they make 80 and I make 3,200. Who are they going to hire? Right?
There's an incentive to get rid of these people.
They're going to get rid of those people, and more. Now we're 57% throughout CUNY, and in some places it's 70 and more percent that people are adjuncts in this individual schools. So they're not going to keep full-timers. Why bother? Why do that? We get hardly any benefits. We, make $3,200 a course, and then we don't even get unemployment insurance at the end of it.
And recently a caucus was formed. Why don't you talk about the Adjuncts Caucus?
Well, there are a number of us. Where there are actually a number of different caucuses, although sometimes we meet together. And basically our demand, we're sort of a mixed bag. There are a lot of different ideas that people have, but our basic demand is 7K and job security, because at the end of the semester they can write you a letter and say you're not rehired, and then you could do all this work for your course, and then if somebody else wants it, some full-timer, then you're out and you don't get paid for all of that work that you've done prior to the semester. So our demand is 7K and job security, but we have to strike.
But you've been organizing demonstrations, Ernest?
We had demonstrations in front of the Board of Trustees. We had demonstrations in front of the union and handed out flyers, because Barbara Bowen didn't support 7K initially.
Oh, she didn't. Why not?
Because, there's a lot of fiscal issues in the city university. And so initially she supported 5K, and then let 5K go. And we thought, well, there's so much inflation since 5K, we want you to fight for 7K. And it's, she says she fights for 7K, but what all she does is take us up to Albany to beg the politicians to be sympathetic to us.
They're pretty prostate to the politicians, aren't they?
I would say pretty much.
Get on their knees?
Pretty much. And Barbara Bowen will organize some demonstration and get herself arrested. So that's on our webpage. But she makes a deal with the police department that she'll be out the next day.
Is that a PR stunt?
I would say so.
So they're good at PR stunts.
Yeah, well, she's very good at it. And she had us support a strike vote, but it was a strike vote to authorize them to strike if they wanted to. And 92% of the union supported the strike vote. But she only used that as a sort of a weapon against Cuomo. And ultimately, we got a contract after 7 years, but the contract was horrible, and it had all the things that I mentioned, which was almost no money. And we have this 3-year contract that's really not, it's a possibility of us being fired.
And recently there was an election. You have all this wealth in New York, and from the Bronx, a woman was elected, Cortez Ocasio. Who is she? And it seems like the New York Times was surprised that somebody like that, who was a former bartender, young person, could get elected. It was a shock. And they were surprised, shocked, and Fox News said a communist has been elected in the Bronx. What's going on there?
Well, what was interesting about Alexandria, she's in the Democratic Socialists, and so she's not really a communist. She's for good things, but she doesn't understand that.
She wants to reform capitalism?
Basically. I mean, she wants people to have Medicare for all, free education.
Well, this is Bernie Sanders, isn't it?
But, I mean, I would say that she's even better than Bernie Sanders, but she's no communist, because she doesn't want to overthrow the system. She doesn't understand that you can't reform capitalism in a way that will really put the working class in power. But what was interesting is that a couple of things. She not only won the Bronx, which is not surprising, but she won Queens. And the area in Queens that she won was white. And so the guy that she defeated was a 10-time congressman slated to take over for Pelosi in the Democratic Party. And so he was utterly amazed. He didn't even have any speech, you know,
He sang a song, didn't he?
born to run. But Pelosi immediately said after that, this is not, we should not have these expectations for the Democratic Party, that this is a one-off thing, but we shouldn't expect the Democratic Party to move left. And so, you know, they were freaked out by it, obviously. But the DSA is not going to overthrow capitalism. They support the Democratic Party. They're going to run in the Democratic Party. They're never going to challenge the Democratic Party. They have illusions that it's possible to reform the Democratic Party. But it was shocking that, I mean, she said all these things. She's been called a communist. And yet the white working class in Queens, not surprising in the Bronx, but in Queens, supported her.
So what does that mean for the future of left in New York and also the development of a real labor working class movement and working class party?
I think the potential is really great. I mean, DSA has 40,000 members nationally, and they organize demonstrations in front of, you know, about strikes all the time. And, you know, whatever problems I have with him, they bring attention to the fact that people are on strike, people are poor. And so it's, you know, what they need to do is actually start pressuring the union bureaucrats to do some, because they don't. They just go ahead and they support strikers, but they don't embarrass the union bureaucrats at all. They don't go in front of the AFL and say, get off your lazy duffs. You know, stop earning $400,000, $500,000 a year and start defending the workers. But it's so terrible in New York in terms of the cost of living, in terms of, you know, low pay, the average salary in AFSCME and DC 37 is $30,000 a year. Imagine people pay rents that if they pay rent they can't afford to eat. And so I think that, you know, America and New York in particular is really on the precipice of changing, you know, in terms of becoming more militant and looking for different solutions than the union bureaucrats. And I think everybody would join a union. New York has been a union town for, you know, decades and decades and decades. People want to be in a union. They understand it's necessary. And yet they can't stand the unions because they sell them out, because they just take their money. People are perfectly aware. Nobody has any illusions on who the bureaucrats are, but they really want a fighting organization. They believe in it. And I think that's pretty universal, especially among the youth. There have been polls among the youth who basically said, we support unions. We want unions, but we want unions that are going to fight. So these old farts are going to have to do something, or they're going to be displaced by very angry people who are beginning to mobilize.